James Rosen from the Fox News Channel. Good morning to you, James.
Hey, good morning to you guys.
All right, I want you to hear a couple of sound bites here. First, here's Hillary Clinton. She's talking about, that server and how, it turned out to be not so convenient after all.
I mean, in retrospect, what was supposed to be convenient has turned out to be anything but convenient.
And then she goes on to say, but you know what? Nobody really cares about this.
Nobody talks to me about it other than you guys.
Nobody but except you guys and the media are asking me questions about this. You've been following this story pretty closely. Are you surprised at the pace and the revelations that have been coming out? It's almost like every minute yesterday there was something new about this story.
Well, and I think it's just as a simple matter of objective fact, inaccurate to say that it's simply the news media that are asking Mrs. Clinton questions about all of this, because she is now engaged in the business of surrendering stuff to the FBI, and that's fairly serious. And in terms of the pace of revelation, Brian, I think that it is moving both very rapidly and yet simultaneously in slow motion before our eyes. There's no telling where it's going to end up, and now we have seen Bob Woodward himself, the Washington Post reporter who helped expose the Watergate scandal and helped win the Pulitzer Prize for the Washington Post, liken this to the Watergate Tapes.
Well, and on that point, you are sort of a guy who likes to root around in the attic of history, as Brit Hume used to say, and you actually have written a book about Watergate figures. What do you think about that comparison?
Well, I think it's apt in the sense, as Woodward said as well, that you have in both cases this enormous volume of data. And in some respects, the comparison is might be unfair to Nixon in the sense that Nixon recorded 3,700 hours of secret tapes in the Oval Office and elsewhere. Of that total volume, ultimately, investigators discovered 18 and a half minutes to have been erased by somebody never fully identified. Probably not Nixon. And in any case, that represents something like 0.0008% of the total. A fraction of 1% of the total turned out to be erased. In the case of Mrs. Clinton, she sent or received 63,000 emails secretly over her private server while she was America's top diplomat. And of that total volume of 63,000 emails, she herself tells us that she herself erased 30,000 of the emails, roughly 48% of them. In some respects, Mrs. Clinton should not find a comparison with Richard Nixon so unwelcome. After all, Richard Nixon is the only modern precedent for what Hillary Clinton is trying to do. She's trying to capture the White House after 2 decades on the national stage of a very polarizing career. The only person who's done that in modern history is Richard Nixon.
Hey, James, it's kind of funny how history sometimes comes around full circle. If you go back in Hillary Clinton's own career, she came to Washington in 1974 to work on that House Judiciary Committee that recommended impeachment. So as a young lawyer going through that process, what lessons do you think she should have taken away from that experience, and how does it apply now to what she's going through?
It's a great point. Mrs. Clinton did serve as a young staff lawyer on the House Judiciary Committee in 1974. She has written in her book, and she has discussed with me directly when she was Secretary of State. I gave her a copy of my Watergate book, and she told me all about how one of the most amazing experiences she had at that time was listening to what was called the tape of tapes. This was the White House Nixon tape recording of June 4, 1973, wherein President Nixon could be heard sitting down and listening to earlier tapes of his and commenting on them. And that was called the tape of tapes. And you ask about how it's relevant to Mrs. Clinton's experience today. It's very unlikely that any recordings were made as Hillary Clinton sat down and reviewed her 63,000 emails and decided which 48% of them to erase. But one has to imagine it was a fairly similar experience for her, going back over all these emails and deciding how history was going to be framed. We should point out, as supporters of Mrs. Clinton do, that unlike Richard Nixon and unlike the Watergate case, none of the authorities have charged Hillary Clinton with committing any crimes. But this is still a very fluid situation, it seems to me.
You know, I was struck, James, earlier this morning when I was looking at, what happened in the last 24 hours in this story. New developments being dropped into the pot by CBS News, by NPR. These are not organizations that you normally would expect to be investigating this matter in a serious way.
Well, and in fact, the actual story that Hillary Clinton used a private email server for the entirety of her tenure as Secretary of State was broken back in March of this year by the New York Times. These, along with Bob Woodward, are not figures typically associated in anybody's mind with a vast right-wing conspiracy against
Well, that's right, exactly. Okay, listen, I want to change topics if I can, because I know you've also been covering the Iranian nuclear negotiations, and we got this sort of stunning revelation yesterday, for those who are not aware, that the IAEA side letter that has been so secret. Well, we got some details about that, and it appears that what the IAEA agreed to, the nuclear watchdog group agreed to, is let the Iranians investigate their most sensitive nuclear site and just tell everybody what they found.
Yeah, we're referring to the nuclear facility, or actually the military installation, a base at a city in Iran called Parchin, where it's suspected that years ago the Iranians were engaged in the design of nuclear warheads and other activities that constitute the so-called PMD, the possible military dimension to the Iranian nuclear program. And one of the key sticking points throughout these negotiations was what kind of access UN nuclear inspectors with the IAEA would have to not only known military sites such as Fordo or Natanz, where we know they have enrichment facilities, but to military sites. Would it be 24/7, anytime, anywhere? Secretary of State Kerry told Congress after the Iran nuclear deal was finalized and agreed in Vienna that nobody was ever talking about 24/7, anytime, anywhere access. He had never mentioned that. And then, in fact, we were able to show a clip from Ben Rhodes, the Deputy National Security Advisor at the White House, saying that we would have 24/7 access to all of their nuclear sites and suspected nuclear sites. Now there comes the revelation that IAEA has arranged that at Parchin, it will be the Iranians themselves who will take the soil samples, the environmental samples, and the other evidence and data by which we can judge what kind of nuclear activity has been going on. And, I just don't know many lawyers, shall we say, who would be impressed with this as the chain of custody for the evidence, going from the Iranians to the IAEA to the P5+1. It's very troubling. It's interesting that this revelation comes as late as it does, and it'll be further interesting to see whether it has any impact on the congressional no's count. Chances are the president will be able to count on enough Democrats in order to be able to override any veto that Congress might muster of the Iran deal.
Okay, well, James, listen, a lot of ground covered there. James Rosen, Fox News chief Washington correspondent and author of The Strong Man, John Mitchell and the Secrets of Watergate. James, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys.